Hi vinyl community, John here. Great to be back. This is going to be a bit of a follow-up to Vinyl Transmission's recent video where he showed some black and white record covers. I think the story goes that he bought a particular record that he showed and really enjoyed the cover, and then sort of dug back into his collection to find out a few others that he liked. I quite like that idea. You can't see beside me, I've got a great big Lodger's records. Ones that I've pulled out of my collection. I had quite a good time going through. I didn't pull all of them out, but most of them. It's surprising, you know, the amount of record covers there are that are black and white. Some, I mean, yeah, the obvious ones are people like Sting, for instance, who's sort of famous almost for his sort of use of black and white in videos and art. I suppose you could say Kate Bush is another one like that too. Anyway, we're listening to this. This is David Bowie's Heroes album. It's the second of his Berlin Trio records. Beautiful cover. I'm going to talk a bit more about this in a little while. I'll come back to this. The first picture, or the first album that Chris Vinyl Transmission showed was the famous first album by Elvis Presley. In a similar vein, I thought I would show this one. It's the Clash album, and this obviously plays homage to the very first Elvis Presley record album cover. What can I tell you? So the photographer of this is a young photographer at the time called Penelope Smith, I think her name was, and she took this picture. It wasn't really sort of originally meant as being a photograph for the album cover. In fact, some of the band didn't really like the idea of using it because it's not necessarily, you know, that much in focus. But they did use it, and it's actually considered one of the greatest rock and roll photographs ever, purely because it sort of captures the moment of the loss of control. This is the I think it's the Clash bassist smashing his guitar, and apparently when I think it was Fender, when Fender asked him about that, why he was doing it, he described how it was just an utter moment of frustration because he'd learnt that the staff at the venue where they were having this concert, the security staff, they won't let people stand up in their seats or anything like that. Can you imagine going to a punk gig in the late 70s and being told to sit down and not wave your hand in the air? So yeah, there you go, that's that. So the next one I'm going to show is this. So this is New Order, Low Life. It's basically 4 black and white shots of the band. It's the first New Order album ever to use portraits of the band. In fact, I think when the band when they were taking these pictures, it wasn't with the understanding that they were going to be used as you know, photographs for the album cover. I would go so far as to say as well, this is really only partially the sleeve. Originally, this came out with a transparent paper cover, like a sleeve that you slid over, and on that transparent paper sleeve was the name New Order, and it's quite an interesting way of doing that. It was like an early attempt to sort of make the cover a bit interactive, basically because you could slide this transparent paper sleeve off with the name on and turn it around and put it on this way, so you could have the name New Order going down here or down here, and, you know, again on the back. this was done by Peter Saville. He was the guy that designed all the work for Joy Division, and continued on creating the work for New Order. What can I say about him? Yeah, well, he was sort of in at the time, I think, in the 80s. Yeah. And yeah, so the typography was very sort of typical of its time. It was sort of a sans serif typeface that sort of went along here. Quite attractive. Okay, so I'll talk about this one now. This is David Bowie's album Heroes. It was the second one in a run of 3 for the Berlin Trio, and it was inspired by a German artist, the work of a German artist called, I think his name was Erich Heckel, and there's a couple of pieces of his art that I'll put up here and show. I can't pronounce the names of those things, I'm not even going to try, so I don't know, good luck with that. But interestingly, this was done at the same time as Iggy Pop did his album The Idiot, and so Iggy Pop's cover of The Idiot was also inspired by work by Erich Heckel as well. And if you put them side by side, you can see actually the sort of the flavour, if you like, the similarity of the concept, what they're thinking about. And interestingly, you know, I've only just thought about this just whilst sort of making this video. The influence that this record had on the next person I'm going to show, and it sort of rings true now for me. I've never really considered this before, but basically it's I'm going to talk about David Sylvian. Listening to this, I can hear, wow, yeah, I can really hear that David Sylvian was obviously hugely influenced by David Bowie in that regard. A lot of the new romantics were, and which is no surprise. But listening to this now, it's like, wow, this could almost be a Japan song or track. It could almost be a David Sylvian solo. So this is David Sylvian's album Secrets of the Beehive. I've always loved this record cover. I don't know if it comes out so well. So this was designed by a man called Vaughan Oliver, who I think he owned like a company, a design company called 29 Envelope, I think it was called. And he is perhaps most renowned for his sort of beautiful use of typography. I don't know if you can see it so well here, but and photography and design is a little bit like music. You know, recently we had this thread about 80s production and how it's dated, and some records that have sort of, you know, suffered with that. Well, design and especially typography is very much that, in that it can easily sort of become old-fashioned and cease to be the kind of cool quality that it's meant to be. Whereas I think this guy, Vaughan Oliver, his work and his typography always stay in style. They always they look good now just as they did then, and I can't see that this is going out of fashion in time. So this is yeah, it's basically a photograph of Flotsam and Jetsam. It looks like it's washed up on a beach, but I suspect that this would have been arranged. I don't think it's a photograph of the way it was. I think this probably would have been arranged, put together, and then photographed as still life. interestingly, this guy Vaughan Oliver, he's famous for, amongst other things, the Pixies album Doolittle, you know, the one with the monkey. So Vaughan Oliver did that as well, which makes use of a photograph by a guy called Simon Le Balestier. And Simon Le Balestier is someone that yeah, has a lot of black and white photography in his work as well. Anyway, so that's that. Now the next one I'm going to show is not a photograph, it's well, it's an illustration, a pen and ink illustration. This is the very first Santana record, called Santana. And it uses this illustration by a guy called Lee Conklin. He was a sort of a psychedelic artist, or he was an up-and-coming artist in sort of the late 60s, and he, amongst other things, one of his earliest works was he did this poster, which I'm about to show now. So that poster was for a gig, and Carlos Santana saw it and really liked it, and approached this guy and said, could you sort of redraft that and make a rendition of it for my first album cover. And it's quite, I guess it's quite a nice sort of meeting, if you like, of two people with their hearts and minds in the same place, you know, because, well, you know, talking about psychedelia, I don't know if you describe Santana as psychedelic, but yeah, I suppose so, especially the early stuff. And so, yeah, working together with this new sort of upcoming artist, making work with pen and ink, and he actually also worked quite hard on this typography as well by hand. I don't know if you can see it so well, but yeah, so basically this illustration, it's not just the face of a lion, but in that face of the lion you can see all sorts of images. There's lots, like there's a lady here with her legs, and the beard of the lion is like a grass skirt, and this is her arms folded, and there underneath the lion's nose is her face, and the nose looks like some sort of a turban type affair. And then you've also got faces here looking out, another face, no, there's even a face at the top there. You know, you could spend hours looking at this, finding all sorts of little details that you didn't originally see. Anyway, that's one of my favourites, I think. Beautiful. So Chris also showed a copy of the TRex album, Electric Warrior. I love that record. I always have done. It's easily somewhere in my top 10 of all time, I would say. And I'm glad you showed it. But I'm not going to show it again myself, because that would be silly. So what I'm going to do is show its follow-up. This is the Slider TRex. Conveniently also a black and white photograph. So TRex, or Mark Bolan, and TRex were working on this album. I can't remember how or why, but it was Ringo Starr was in the vicinity, and he was doing, I don't know what he was doing, directing a film or something like that, I don't know. And I think they would probably rub shoulders a bit. And if you look at the liner notes on this record, you'll see that Ringo Starr actually has the photo credit that says Ringo Starr Photography. And so everybody believed that Ringo Starr actually did take this picture. But then the truth is apparently that Tony Visconti, who was the producer of this record, he said it was actually him that took the picture. One day during a break, Mark Bolan gave a camera to Visconti and said, "Hey, can you snap some shots of me in this hat?" Which he went on and did. And yeah, they eventually became the picture for this album, front and back. And Mark Bolan, being Mark Bolan, rather than giving the photo credit to Tony Visconti, who was, you know, perhaps he wasn't such a household name at the time, he put Ringo Starr's name there, very opportunistically, because, well, I guess it's quite cool bragging rights, isn't it? Hey, my album cover was photographed by the drummer of the Beatles. So there you go. He didn't really take it. It was Tony Visconti all the time. I'm going to follow up with another T-Rex album. Now this is the fourth one. This is, yeah, this came after the Slider. It's an album called Tanks. I don't know much about the making of this or who took it, but I do know that when it first appeared in the shops, it was a bit controversial. Some people didn't like the idea of stocking it because they felt that the photography was too suggestive. You see him sitting on this tank here. Maybe that's not so apparent, I don't know, but I'm going to put a picture here now for you to see. Yeah, the picture I'm going to put here is of the same photo shoot, if you like, and maybe that makes it a little bit obvious of why it's considered suggestive. So make of that what you will. There you go. The next one I'm going to show is a record by The Damned. This is Phantasmagoria. One of my favourite records too. I love this album, and I have had it for so long. It's one of my earliest records. It came out in '85, so black and white all the way through. That's a beautiful photo montage, that, isn't it? It's really sort of gothic. And before I tell you the really interesting bit about this, is I'll show you the white vinyl as well with the black and white label. Now, I don't know who the photographer was for these pictures. I don't suppose it was anyone significant, but there is a nice credit on the liner notes here. Yeah, calligraphy by Boos, B-O-O-C-E. Calligraphy is the art of writing with ink. It could be quill and ink, or it could be pen and ink. But this being made in '85. It was before desktop publishing had really taken hold. I mean, if it existed at all in '85, it would have been in its infancy. And so it's interesting to think that they actually got someone, a professional calligrapher, to render the wording of the text of their album. I mean, yeah, hot metal type was used normally for just regular text, but as you can see, this is pretty much the same calligraphic style all the way through. I've always thought that's interesting to think that yeah, well, it's basically how people used to write Bibles and things. Here the Damned have got somebody doing a similar thing for their record cover. But the really interesting thing I'm going to share with you about this is this model. So this model is a lady called, well, she's a model called Susie Bick. She's got quite an interesting history. She was a bit of a wild girl in her time. She ran away from boarding school and sort of got into mischief and become a model and everything like that. She runs a design company now, like a clothes design company. And I don't know if this has any influence on it, but the name of her design company is called The Vampire's Wife. But she's actually interesting as well, because she's married to Nick Cave, the Australian guy, and if you look them up, you'll see pictures online of these two together, and it's like, well, they actually look like vampires. Nick Cave kind of looks a bit like a vampire. I'm going to put a picture here for you to see. They actually look like they want to come to you and bite your neck. So there you go, Nick Cave's wife. I don't think they were married at this point when she did this, but no, not a lot of people know that. The last one I'm going to show now, don't want this to drag on, I've got so many and I'd love to talk about them all, but you know, you got to try and keep the numbers down. This is Quadrophenia by The Who. The front cover wasn't designed by the sort of the big name person. It's, yeah, the photographer is a guy called Graham Hughes, and he's, yeah, what should we say? Well, he's not particularly famous. He still works now, I think. But the idea, the concept for the cover was apparently Roger Daltrey's, and I sympathise with this guy, Hughes, as a person that works with images, and you know, I'm a designer and things. When you're working with a client and they want to kind of give you ideas, or I don't know, make suggestions, more often than not they're a bit silly, they're a bit naive, they're impractical, or there's seldom are they the best idea that's going to work for their needs. I wonder if this guy was basically pressured into doing this cover because Roger Daltrey was a singer in a band and he got to make the decisions. I mean, it's an interesting idea. Yeah, okay, you got this guy, this young teenage mod on his scooter, but then you've got the four faces of the Who in the mirrors off the scooter. I don't know if that's good or bad. I mean, they're so small, they're almost insignificant. When you're looking at this record cover from this distance, you don't necessarily see these faces. You'd need to be holding it right up here to be able to know who they are, I think. I just think they could have been done better. Oh, that's a beautiful photograph. But the beauty of this, like the back cover, and also the booklet, there's a booklet inside here. I don't know if you can see these very well. I might just put these on as pictures. But these were done by a chap called Ethan Russell, who is a photographer from America, New York, I believe, and he sort of was recruited to make this. And this was before the film was made, so you know, you might think that they're stills from the film, but they're not. They're completely separate from the film. Well, yeah, what I think is quite interesting is that the guy that did those photographs in the booklet, I mean, he'd done lots. He'd photographed the Beatles, the Stones, loads of people. I think he's the one that did the Let It Be cover, 4 photographs of the Beatles. It's interesting how they got this guy from America to come over and take these pictures of very much suburban life of late 1950s, early 1960s Britain, or England especially, I suppose. And you know, he does such a great job of showing some sort of urban decay, sort of social degradation, and I can see how, yeah, a British person might sort of be able to do a great job of photographing that, but it's surprising that as an American that he could come over and do such a great job of representing those. But there you go. So that's my last record. There's so many more that I would love to go through. I mean, so many, you know, like that and that and that. I can't do them all. It would be great if there were other people who have a go at this and talk about some of their favourite black and white covers. Thanks very much for watching. Hope this was of some interest to everybody. Thanks Chris for taking initiative and setting this up. Really good idea. Check out my next video. Thanks, bye.